Hello, I'm John Wolter, instructor for English 302, Advanced Composition, sections M01 and M03, and this is the first of a two-part lecture on writing, drawing from the Craft of Research readings for week 5. Quick overview of our lecture. Going to first take a look at the prologue to part 4. Then I'm going to briefly talk about Sandra Pearl's composing guidelines, which are not in the Craft of Research. The guidelines are a kind of a way of helping you generate ideas, whether you're sort of dealing with a topic that you want to kind of, at the start, and you kind of want to explore how you might approach it, or they're even useful if you don't actually know what you want to write about. We'll then take a look at the quick tip section on outlining and storyboarding and talk about planning from chapter 12. In the second part of the lecture, which will be in a separate video, we'll look at chapter 13 on drafting. We'll talk about the collage method developed by Peter Elbow as a way of helping you generate lots of text early on and very quickly as part of drafting. And then finally we'll talk about revision and look at covering sort of chapter 14. Okay, so starting with the prologue to section 4. The takeaway from this section, these 2 pages, is that while there is no one way to go about drafting a project, while drafting a project is never a straightforward task, a good indication that you have done enough research, enough note-taking, enough idea generation, etc., and that you might be ready to shift to drafting is when you can answer the questions they list on pages 173 and 174. Those questions. Who are your readers? Who are going to be your readers? What do they know? And why should they care about your topic? Can you answer those questions? What ethos do you want to project? Are you trying to come across as a scholarly expert reporting new information to a scholarly audience? Are you an LGBTQ activist seeking to offer helpful information for those wanting to create an LGBTQ-friendly workplace? Are you an avid mountain biker who's trying to seek accommodation to help protect vulnerable ecosystem while still allowing bikers to enjoy their sport? Are you kind of representing your company, the company you work for, as your company bids on a project? Are you writing the actual proposal? And one of the things to take away here in this idea of ethos is that each of these stances, you're going to sort of develop different strategies to project this persona. For instance, your company, it's not just you as an employee representing the company that when you're writing the bid, putting together the proposal, you're actually sort of representing your company itself. And that's going to have a very sort of different voice and your goals. You're going to want to generally come across as sort of very professional, a group that can get things done quickly, etc. And so that's going to have a very different stance than a scholarly expert trying to report on new information to a scholarly audience, as opposed to a popular audience, like giving a popular talk at a local library. Likewise, if you're a mountain biker and you want to ride, continue to ensure that mountain bikers have access to a certain set of trails. However, those trails are in a vulnerable ecosystem where just the very fact that people who ride off trail or just the heavy use can actually cause problems with erosion, threaten endangered species in various ways by having just more human presence there, etc. Are you trying? Do you want to come across as someone who actually is aware of and recognizes these concerns? And so you're trying to find a way that you and your fellow mountain bikers can still enjoy mountain biking in the area while also trying to help address those issues, or do you want to come across as someone who just doesn't care? It's like we have a right to ride our mountain bikes here, and we're going to do it. We don't care about anything else. All those are all different types of stances in which you project a different type of ethos. So the question, what kind of ethos are you trying to establish for your writing? Then can you sketch out your research question, and can you answer it in a couple sentences? Basically, if you've ever heard the idea of the concept of an elevator pitch, you've got an idea for a novel, you've got an idea for a TV show, you've got an idea for a movie, you've got a great new business proposal, and you get access to the head executive, and you're riding in the elevator with them, and they're like, "So, what are you doing?" You've got as long as you're in the elevator to sell them on the idea. It's this idea of the elevator. Can you succinctly and quickly explain what you're dealing with, but also give it enough context, give it enough concrete information that it doesn't sound like some vague idea, but actually has some specifics to it. And there's an art to that. But one of the things about this is that if you can actually do that, if you can actually, provide a quick, short answer in a couple sentences, you really have a good command of your topic and the issues that are involved. Can you sketch the reasons and evidence that support your claim? Now, if you remember back a couple weeks ago when the craft of research, and we were talking about enthymemes and the craft of research, there was the idea in the book, the argument that the increase in global temperatures was moving the hard freeze line north, and that was increasing medical costs. And we had to sort of take that, kind of unpack that argument to understand that really what's going on there was that we have medical costs related to the treatment of disease and disease eradication that's connected to subtropical insects such as mosquitoes, and that with the hard freeze line moving further northwards, that means that the territory that mosquitoes can operate in expands, and that the number of mosquitoes that survive over the winter because they don't die from the freezes means that there's more just mosquitoes around in general. And so, we had to unpack that whole argument and talk about the series of sub-arguments, smaller arguments within the large argument to make the actual case. So that's what this is getting at here. You actually have not just your main argument, your main claim and your reasons, but do you have all the sub-arguments you need to make to walk your audience from to fill in all the sub-arguments to walk your audience through all the logic and reasoning to go from A to B to C to D to finally get them to where you want them to be at E. Can you list some likely questions, objections, and alternatives your audience might raise? And do you have reasonable responses to them? We actually will talk later this semester specifically about dealing with sort of objections and questions and alternatives, but we've kind of talked about this a little bit, this idea that people might propose different ideas or might have a reasonable sort of say, well, it could be better if we do it this way, right? And so you want to try to figure out what some of these reasonable things that reasonable people might raise, and you have some ways of handling those. And finally, have you figured out what the warrants are for the arguments you're making? So you want to think about all those things. Can you provide answers to each of these? If you can, then it's likely that you have enough to start drafting, to actually draft in a productive way, because you have a lot of the information at hand, and so you're ready to move on to the stage where you're actually put that information down on paper. Do keep in mind, however, that doesn't mean that you're not going to need to go back and do more research at any point, or that you're not going to have to stop and sort of do additional planning or whatever. Research writing of this sort is rarely straightforward, and it's rarely a simple process. It's more often than not, you're going to have to go back, redo things, as they note, as Booth, Coleman, and Williams note in their book. You run into dead ends, you develop problems, you kind of realize you don't have enough information, and so you work around these. But if you've been able to answer the questions that they list in the prologue, then you have a starting point. That's the point where you think, okay, maybe I can start. That's the other problem with doing research, is that we can always do research. There's always more information than we're ever going to be able to understand, to read. There's always one more thing we can look at, and so there's a point where you need to sort of be able to draw a line and say, okay, at least I'm going to start, I'm going to stop doing research, I'm going to start trying to write this. And so that's also another good reason why, if you can answer those questions, that you may still need to do more research, you may still do more planning, but you have enough to at least get started. And in doing that, you then discover where you can target more specifically what you might need. You're like, oh, actually I need to address this particular issue. And then you can go do targeted research just about that particular issue to solve that particular problem, rather than just reading broadly. Because there's a point where, again, you've read enough, you need to start doing the writing. Okay, so having talked about that, I want to move on to Sandra Pearl's composing guidelines. If you find yourself really stuck, if you've done a bunch of research and you have some ideas, but you really don't know what to say or how you're going to say it, you might take a look at Sandra Pearl's composing guidelines. Pearl offers 12 steps, mostly questions to which you respond, that can help you explore a topic. And I want to note here that I am someone who's not particularly keen on things that have like, touchy-feely sort of things, sort of new agey, kind of touchy-feely. Let's kind of things, but and Senator Pearl's guidelines are pretty touchy-feely, but I will note that they work. They really do work. I have used them myself. I have taught with them, and so if you're someone who feels really kind of just like touchy-feely stuff, you may need to just work with them a little bit. Sort of put that sort of recognize that, yeah, this stuff is touchy-feely. It's going to be touchy-feely, but I'm going to give it a try anyways. You can find a copy of the guidelines in the Week 5 handouts folder, so you can take a look at that. The handout we've got comes from a workshop that she's done, and she actually has a whole book that kind of goes into much more detail, but the handout has a little bit of explanation about the key concepts, how to use the guidelines, and then the guidelines itself. Okay, so moving on to outlining and storyboarding, the quick tip section. I'm assuming that most of you at some point in your life were required by a teacher to create a formal outline. Often required to create a formal outline before you had really started to draft anything. And I've had that happen. I never found that to be helpful at all. Now, some of you, maybe it was helpful. Some people love formal outlines. They love to do formal outlines before they write. And if you're one of those people, awesome, do them. For those of you who don't like me, who have not really had really good experience with formal outlines at the beginning of a project, there are ways you can use outlining and storyboarding to be helpful. And I found them to be helpful in two different stages. First stage is when you've gathered all your initial research and you're about to draft. Some kind of outlining, not a formal outline, but some kind of outlining can be useful, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And then the other time when outlines are really helpful, and especially formal outlines, I actually find formal outlines really helpful once I've actually written a draft, and I'll explain how to do that in just a minute too. So first, on pages 175, 176, Booth, Coleman, Williams discuss the idea of topic outlines and point outlines. And these kinds of outlines can be really useful once you've sort of done your preliminary research, you've kind of gathered all your information together, and you know the answers to the questions they list in the prologue, in Part 4 prologue. At that stage, you might want to create some sort of, a topic outline or a point outline, rather than sort of creating the big formal outline. Though you might want to do a formal outline if you find that helpful. What I do often at this stage is I create what's known as a scratch outline, which is very similar to a topic or point outline. And I create my scratch outline based on what I call, basically kind of off of sort of brainstorming a clustering activity. That is, I write down just all the major ideas, arguments, topics, keywords, issues that come to mind that I know that I want to deal with. And again, I might start this at the beginning of a project, or once I've done all the research, I often do this to sort of just get down all these ideas, topics, keywords, arguments, things that I know that I need to deal with, and I just write them whatever list they come, and then I kind of fill in as I continue to write. And once I do that, once I get this sort of just big list of things, I actually then try kind of organizing them, so I kind of group them together. So if something is actually related to something else, if something's actually a subpoint or a subtopic to something else, I kind of group all those things that are related with one another. And if there's some connections between things, I might sort of indicate that. And then once I've done that, I then try to create an organized list. So the scratch outline, which looks a lot like the point or topic outline, that kind of creates some sort of order with all this information, and kind of present them in the order that I want to deal with them. And so then that, again, it's not a formal outline, but it's gives some sort of structure to the information, so I have an idea of how I might work through it. And then by having that sort of visual representation, you can then sort of you might even be able to think about, it's like, okay, so if I know that I need to prove that, mosquitoes, because fewer mosquitoes are dying because the hardline freeze has moved north, and that's going to cause more disease. I have to talk about that before I talk about before I explain the fact that we need to spend more money on disease eradication, because people aren't going to understand why we have to spend more money on disease eradication if they don't understand why the disease is a threat that it wasn't 10 years ago. So you can sort of figure out how you kind of move topics around so you can give yourself some order there. So, but again, if you'd like to create formal outlines before you start drafting, do it. The only real rule, the one hard, fast rule that I'm going to give you when it comes to planning and drafting, is that you do what works for you. There is, that's the thing. There is no one way of doing it. There's no ideal way of doing it. There is just what works for you at that time. And that's important to note, because sometimes what works for you for one project won't work for you for another project, and vice, and so what seems to work is what is the way you should go. So while that's kind of how I think about, I kind of use outlining, storyboarding at the beginning of a project, how Booth, Coleman, and Williams talk about it. I find formal outlines really useful once I've created a formal draft. In short, once you've sort of written a draft of a paper and kind of done a revision, and you think you've got this, kind of a good paper going, I like to create a formal outline of the paper, kind of sentence by sentence, looking at each paragraph. So you kind of do the big structure. So I've got an outline that sort of indicates the whole structure of the paper and sort of the major movements, and then an outline that also shows me how the multiple paragraphs develop a particular idea, the subsections, etc., and then how the sentences develop the paragraphs. So you have that, and then you have this formal outline that sort of gives you a visual representation of how you've developed your argument, broken down, so you can actually sort of analyze it from the largest scale, from the sort of the macro structural scale, all the way down to the sentence by sentence level development of each individual paragraph. And you can use that formal outline then to examine how you've structured your paper. Do you realize by having done this that you're actually dealing with the same topic, kind of the same idea in a couple different places? And if so, can you actually just combine them together? Do you realize that you've actually kind of left a gap somewhere? Are you talking about issue X before you talk about issue Y, when you really need to talk about issue Y before you talk about issue X? So that's a formal outline after you've written a draft can be really helpful in helping you sort of understand the structure of your paper and you can use it as a revision tool. Okay, so you get on with some planning here again. Whatever you do, however you organize your ideas, whether you create outlines, storyboarding, organize, use index cards, mind mapping, whatever, you do want to kind of develop some sort of plan when you start to draft. To use a map metaphor, you know where you are, where you're starting from, and you know where you want to go. You know that you're trying to convince your audience of issue X. And again, to return back to the idea of the mosquitoes, the fact that increased global temperatures, moving the hard freeze line north means increased medical costs. You know that there's multiple sort of arguments you have to walk your audience through to understand the initial claim that the movement of the hard freeze lines north is going to increase disease, money we spend on disease, or medical costs. It's going to increase medical costs. You know that there are multiple stops, multiple positions along this argument that you need to make. So you can think of this as in terms of a map. You know where you are, you know where you need to go, and you know that you need to stop at certain places, or at least you need to pass through certain places to get from A to point, from A to point E, because you might be able to, if you were used again the map, if we want to go all the way up to New York, we could technically drive all the way out to Louisville in Kentucky from Fairfax, and then sort of swing around up through Ohio, and then over up through from Ohio up into Michigan, from Michigan over into Ontario, and then across Canada, and then drop back down into northern New York, and then drive down to New York City. We could do that if we want to, or we could just move up the coast. We could just go up I-95, and so you have a map, and you figure out what stops, what kind of key points you want to hit on your map, and that is kind of the map metaphor. This is what sort of the organizing does for you, whether it's an outline, a scratch outline, a point index outline, kind of a whatever you use, storyboarding. You're kind of figuring out the kind of path you're going to take, and of course you can always change your path as you go, but you have a path, so you kind of know what you're working towards, and that makes it easier for you to do what you're going to do. And especially if you feel overwhelmed, if you know that you need to go from point A to point B, well, your final goal is point E, then you can focus on just going from point A to point B. At that, you can say that, okay, that's a task I need to do, rather than be overwhelmed by your entire project. So that's another benefit of having some planning in place. So on pages 177 to 79, Booth, Coleman, and Williams identify 3 organizational strategies that you should not use. First, they say, you don't want to organize your report as a narrative of your thinking. That is, you don't want to sort of say, okay, so first I thought, when I looked at this argument, I thought this, and then I realized, okay, so to do that, we have to talk about this, and then if I think about this idea, and then I accept this idea, then that means sort of accepting this idea, and this idea, and this idea, and those ideas lead us to this idea, and that takes us to, you don't want to do that. That's not how a final report, a final essay should look. Now, if you need to do that as part of the process of getting your ideas down on paper or typed up on your computer, that is fine. If you need, we can call that a 0 draft or a first draft, whatever. If that's how, if that is what you need to do to create that first draft or that 0 draft, do it, because that means you have the draft. If you do that, if you do that, then you just need to know that you're going to have to radically revise what you've written, but you have the initial ideas down. The other thing you don't want to do is just create a patchwork of your sources, as they note. You don't want to just sort of summarize source by source and have your entire report just be a summary of one source after another, kind of working through them. Even when you create a literature review, you're not just summarizing source after source after source in some random order. What you actually do when you create a literature review is you actually sort of organize all your sources. You kind of group your sources by, and kind of create some sort of formal groupings of sources, and you discuss this group of sources that relate to each other in a certain way, and then this group of sources that relate to each other in a certain way, or deal with a certain aspect of what you're getting at. And so you even when you're doing a literature review, you are actually creating some kind of established order in which you talk about your sources. And so you should never just have a summary of sources going through. And finally, as they note, you don't want to just structure your writing based on an assignment. And the example they really use is sort of like you kind of rewriting, kind of paraphrasing the actual assignment in the introduction. You don't want to do that. There's an exception to this, and that is some very specialized genres, some forms of proposals, particularly sort of research grant proposals, may give you a very strict format. They may actually even tell you that you need to say certain things in certain places, and you need to say them in this kind of way. Those are specialized genres, and when you come across those, you then do them. But for general, kind of a general rule, you don't want to just sort of verbatim or use the assignment as your model of how you organize something. Okay, so moving on again. Most of chapter 12 itself, after they tell you 3 ways not to do to organize your paper or your report, the rest of chapter 12 focuses on a method of how you might sketch out a draft. And this is just one way of doing it. And what they do is they sort of walk you through multiple steps and kind of multiple sections, and ask you to think about some issues for each of the different kind of sections you need to deal with, and they ask you to kind of even create a new page for each section you're going to work with. And if you're having trouble organizing project one or any project, or you kind of know that in the past you've had problems sort of struggling with sort of organization, or you're not sure how to organize or how to kind of get things started, give it a try. Just sort of actually walk through chapter 12. Use chapter 12 as a model and sort of do the method they're suggesting. It may work for you. It may, and if it does, great. If it doesn't, if it's finding it's not sort of gelling things together, that's okay. You can stop trying to use it there. It may be that it never works for you. It may be that sometimes it will. One thing to keep in mind, the worst thing that can really happen if you kind of use their model, as you kind of follow their model, give it a try, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to say, no, it's not working for me, and you're going to walk away to try and then do some other model. But even walking away, chances are that you will have some paragraphs or at least some sentences drafted that you didn't have before you started the process. Because just by sort of doing some of the things they ask you to do, you are going to generate some writing that you will be able to use in however you end up developing your draft. So it's a way, it's a model, it's a method you might try. Okay, so that ends this first part of this lecture, and so we'll pick up the second half in the separate video. If you have questions, as always, you can post them to the general discussion section in our Blackboard discussion forums, and thank you.